This is Andrea Lee, and as part of my final project for CSCI E159, I will walk you through the 2025 European airport cyber disruption, where a ransomware incident against Collins Aerospace Muse passenger processing platform effectively crowded many parts of Europe's aviation system. So I will structure the presentation in 5 parts. First, I will give a short executive summary of what happened and why it matters. And then I will move on to explain a little bit more details about Muse system architecture and the trust boundary before elaborating on the full timeline of how and what the incident unfolded. Then I will also provide and analyze the value and also cybersecurity value analysis mapped to the CIA triad together with the resilience perspective. And last but not least, I will conclude the presentation with some technical and also organizational recommendations to avoid the next crowded in the cloud event. Without further ado, let's get started. So in September 2025, ransomware hit system hosting Collins Aerospace Muse platform, a common use passenger processing system used by multiple airlines for check-in and also baggage management. So when the Muse backend services went offline, major airports such as London Heathrow, Brussels, Berlin, amongst more, lost their electronic check-in and also baggage capability almost simultaneously. Operators fell back into manual processing, including printing boarding passes, hand tagging every single bag, using backup laptops, etc., which is inherently low throughput. So queues built up gradually, and more than 1,000, almost 1,200 flights were disrupted or even cancelled. So the key takeaway here is that this is not an isolated airline IT failure, but rather it is a single third-party cloud dependency that had quietly become a systemic single point of failure for the whole European aviation. Before we get into the further detail, we have been talking a lot about Muse and so on, but what Muse actually is. So Muse actually stands for Multi-User System Environment, and it is Collins Aerospace Common Use Passenger Processing Platform. So basically, it is a shared check-in and onboarding system that multiple airlines at an airport plug into instead of each airline creating and running its own stack. So that's why on the left of the diagram, you see the airline and airport front ends, receive web and mobile check-ins, the liquidity departure control system, DCS, and also the self-service kiosk in the terminal. All of this talk to the Muse API gateway over HTTPS. So for those front end, Muse is effectively the back end as well. Behind the gateway in the Collins managed cloud, Muse is decomposed into microservices. So on the right hand side, that validates passenger, update the central passenger database, generate boarding pass barcodes, and exchange data with the backend system, plus logging, monitoring, and so on. And the yellow-orange line on the slide is the trust boundary. So to the left, we have the airline, the airport system, and to the right, we have the vendor-managed infrastructure and also the admin network that runs deployments and operation. Because so many airlines depend on this one shared environment, once the ransomware executed in that hosting and management layer, and those microservices were encrypted or taken offline, every single front end that relied on the Muse lost the ability to process passengers at once. Then moving on to the incident timeline. With the architecture in mind, here is how the incident unfolded. So on September 19, RTX, which is the parent company of Collins Aerospace, detects that it is what it later called as a cybersecurity incident involving ransomware on systems supporting Muse. Brussels and Brandenburg are the first two airports to show symptoms and switch to manual check-in and boarding. Proceeding to the 20th of September, the disruption clearly goes systemic. Automatic check-in, boarding, and baggages failed at major hubs, including London, Brussels, Berlin. Airports pull out their backup laptops, move to paper processes, and delays, cancellations start to stack up more and more. On the 21st and 22nd, the outage became a multi-day event. Dublin Terminal 2 and parcels remained heavily degraded. On the 22nd, ENISA confirms that it is a third-party ransomware attack against Collins is responsible, and the European law enforcement and national CERTs joined the response. On the 23rd and 24th of September, airports slowly recovered capacity, but some warned of the extended check-in times. RTX has to file an 8K with the US SEC, publicly characterizing the issue as ransomware on systems that support Muse, explicitly identifying the vendor platform, not just airport IT, as the primary value point. From the 25th to the 29th onwards, Collins runs out fixes and in parcels. They begin deploying and also the replacement checking system. By the month-end operations are mostly stabilized, but the dependency on a single shared platform has been exposed, and the risk of resilience and so on has created very chaos and also a lot of discussion around this. On this slide, I specifically put the story together into what actually broke and how it escalated and it became that bad. So technically it was a fairly classic ransomware event. Malicious code executing on the Muse hosting and management infrastructure, encrypting or disabling core backend services. Once the checking and onboarding microservices went dark, the shared API effectively disappeared for every airline DCS. The web front-end kiosk at the lowest level, the immediate value was loss of availability of those shared API. So what turned that into a continent-level crisis were the bullet on the right. The industry had over-centralized dependency on one single vendor platform. The product environment wasn't segmented and hardened to critical infrastructure standards. In addition, most airlines only had limited fallback or offline check-in, so manual workarounds were extremely slow. Last but not least, operational playbook assumes short-leg glitches, not a multi-day party outage. So that basically meaning we are not ready, they're not ready for that to come, and they don't know how to react. So these structural weaknesses are what I unpack next in the cybersecurity value analysis. So if we view through the CIA triad plus resilience, the picture becomes clear. So first and foremost, if we talk about availability, ransomware took the core Muse services offline and airlines lack independent checking capability. So once the vendor platform was encrypted, the queues and delay become obvious. Next, if we look at integrity, then quick change, deployment governance, and insufficient hardening of the product infrastructure allowed malicious code to execute and disrupt service continuity. The shared safety critical platform should be run with either EDR, tight segmentation, and least privilege in its hosting environment. Next, if we look at confidentiality and privacy dimension, misconfigure headers and also diagnosis leak internal URLs and system details. That didn't cause the outage, but it increased the exposure to follow-on attacks such as SSRF or targeting phishing. Last but not least, if we look at the resilience dimension, the real systemic issue over this was the over-centralized dependence on one single vendor and platform. That design choice turned a vendor incident into a constant EU-wide disruption because the blast automatically recover the blast radius automatically cover every single airline and airport built on that platform. So in this business case, actually there are a lot of relevant concepts that have been walked through or mentioned during our course. So first and foremost, HTTPS TLS did its job. The traffic between the airline, the Mule gateway remained encrypted. The outage showed that perfect crypto doesn't help if the application behind it is taken down by ransomware. Availability still has to be engineered. Second, the incident stressed cookies and sessions. As services left or even were partially restored, sessions broke, and agent bypassed the mobile front end, exactly where the ad hoc workaround start to erode the security model. Third, weak CSP and referral policy headers mean internal URL leak during redirects and error handling. In a live exploit, those would be ideal starting point for SSRF using front-end requests to course back and services into talking to internal resources. And finally, it highlights also how fragile the implicit trust boundary is between the airline front end and also the vendor managed microservices. So when that anchor was compromised, every dependent client inherited the failure as well. So to avoid the next similar or Credit in the cloud event, my recommendation is to focus on the plus creditors rather than pretending ransomware will better land. So first, segmentation and redundancy. Treat the MU-style platform as critical services that must be multi-region or multi-cloud, and ensuring airline retain at least minimal local or offline check-in capability, and cache manifest, and the ability to print boarding passes with a live call to the platform. Second, CSP and referral policy. So we have to apply strict policy across all of the web properties to stop browsers bloating arbitrary third-party code and sending internal paths to other domains, closing down unnecessary attack surface. Third, zero trust API infrastructure. So here, technically, every request into the API gateway should be or even must be authenticated, authorized, rate limited, and validated based on the privilege and context. Even if it originates from a trusted partner front end. Fourth, SSRF protection. In a microservice environment, outbound HTTP should be tightly whitelisted, user-controlled input carefully sanitized, and calls funneled through the hardened proxies that block the access to metadata, services, and management network. Fifth, incident response readiness. So, in the spirit of the EU DORA regulation, which technically stands for Digital Operational and Resilience Act, we have to identify what are the critical services. We have also then to define the tolerance level, what is the maximal disruption downtime acceptable, and routinely test ransomware and also vendor outage scenario end to end, so that the code-free time and also data loss objective are actually achievable. But this is not it. We also have to look at the organizational side or the organizational control. And the key message here is that to treat platforms as meals as a critical infrastructure and not just any other IT vendor. So that means stronger third-party risk governance, structured due diligence, continuous monitoring, explicit analysis of concentration risk if many airlines rely on the same provider. On top of that is also mid-contracts, SLA that covers security posture, resilient target, RTO, RPO, rapid incident notification. All of this must be covered. Operators should run regular tabletop simulations of multi-day vendor outages involving airlines, airport vendors to test manual workarounds and decision-making under realistic constraints and conditions. Finally, every major incident should trigger mandatory post-incident reporting and also joint lesson learned, so the ecosystem improves rather than treating each disruption as a one-off glitch. So with that being said, this is the end of my presentation. I hope you found it interesting, insightful, and thank you so much for all of the knowledge shared during the sessions we had so far. Thank you very much, and have a good day ahead.